Here's a truth no one has ever dared to whisper in your ear. You're imprisoned. Yes, you. Trapped inside a cage of your own making, every brick carefully laid by your own hands. Each time you hesitated, worrying what they might think. Every dream you abandoned, afraid to stumble. Those hollow smiles plastered over the raw, screaming truth inside. That tightening in your chest. It's not just fear. It's not merely stress. It's the crushing weight of a life surrendered to an audience that never even bought a ticket to your performance. They don't applaud. They don't care. And yet, you keep playing the role they never asked for. Do you know what is the cruelest thing? Nobody asked you to make that sacrifice. Nobody asked you to give up your freedom, your essence, your authenticity. But you did it voluntarily. You chained yourself to others' expectations, selling your identity in exchange for ephemeral applause, for momentary approval. And now that you look inside, what remains of you? What part is authentically yours? And what part was shaped by fear, by insecurity, by the sick need to fit in? They made you believe that control was the key. They sold you the illusion that if you managed every aspect of your life, everything would turn out well. Everything would be perfect. Do you want to know the truth that nobody dares to tell you? Absolute control is a lie, a mental trap designed to keep you busy, distracted, disconnected from what really matters. The more you obsess over having control, the more you slide towards anxiety, towards silent desperation, towards a life that you never finish living because you're always busy preparing for something that never arrives. Have you ever wondered why you feel that inexplicable void despite apparently having it all? It's because what you have isn't really yours. Your success, your relationships, even your thoughts are contaminated by the constant worry about how they will be perceived by others. And the more you seek external validation, the further you drift from your center, from that true essence that you once knew how to recognize, but that now you barely remember. Michel de Montaigne, from his silent tower in the 16th century, saw clearly what today you don't want to accept. That detachment is not indifference, but the only path towards true freedom. He understood that we live trapped not by external circumstances, but by our sick attempt to control the uncontrollable, by our obsession to please, to fit in, to avoid criticism at all costs. But what if I told you that the detachment you so fear is precisely the key that opens the door to your freedom? What would happen if, for a moment, you dared to let go of that rope you hold so tightly? That rope that you believe saves you, but that in reality is slowly suffocating you? Because here's the paradox. The more you try to control, the less control you actually have. The more you seek to please, the less authentic you are. And the more you resist change, the stronger it hits you when it inevitably comes. The world does not function under your control, and it never will. Accepting this is not weakness, it is wisdom. Life, in its chaos and unpredictability, demands something very simple but terrifying: to let go. Let go of your need for approval. Let go of your fear of failing. Let go of that false identity you've created to protect yourself from others' judgment. Imagine for a second, what would happen if you stopped worrying so much about others' opinions? Who would you be without that constant fear? What would you do if you knew nobody would ever judge you? That person you see in your mind right now, that version of yourself who lives without mental chains, is who you really are. But there's something darker, something deeper behind this uncomfortable reality. And it's that you fear letting go of control because deep down, you don't know who you are without those chains. You're afraid to discover that your identity has been so diluted, so mixed with the external, that upon letting go of all that, maybe nothing would remain. But here's the liberating and brutal truth that Montaigne whispered from his tower centuries ago. By letting go of what you are not for the first time, you can clearly see what you are. The freedom you seek is just on the other side of the fear that now paralyzes you. It's not in a self-help book, nor in motivational advice, nor in any mystical secret. It's here, in this precise moment, waiting for you to have enough courage to face your life and say, I no longer need anyone's approval. I no longer need to control the unpredictable. I no longer need to pretend who I am not. Now tell me, are you ready to let go? Or will you continue clinging to control, knowing that each day that passes takes you further from your true essence? This is just the beginning of a journey that you may not want to make, but desperately need. And the decision is solely in your hands. Will you live trapped in a golden cage built by yourself? Or will you accept the risk of jumping into the unknown, into a freedom that may terrify you, but that ultimately makes you feel alive? Welcome to the philosophy of detachment, to the pursuit of an inner freedom that will change absolutely everything you thought you knew about yourself. The path is unsettling, but I assure you, the only thing more terrifying than moving towards that freedom is staying exactly where you are now. You have been convinced that pursuing goals is the most important thing, but what would happen if you discovered that most of those goals were never really yours? All your life, you have been striving to climb ladders that others built, without ever questioning whether you really wanted to get there. And now that you are so high up, what do you see? The panorama you dreamed of? Or just the distorted reflection of what someone else wanted you to be? We are obsessed with the idea of success, believing that achieving certain goals will finally give us peace. But have you ever wondered what exactly success is? And more importantly, whose success? Perhaps you have already achieved several of those goals that were supposed to make you happy. Studying the right thing, working where it corresponds, relating with the right people, and yet you feel that something is missing. That feeling, that uncomfortable truth that wakes you up at night, is the voice you've ignored for too long. Your authentic essence, demanding to be heard. Montaigne discovered in his voluntary confinement, away from the noise of the world, something revealing and dangerous. That true success looks nothing like what they sold you. It is not a social position, not an accumulation of goods, not even external recognition. True success, the one few dare to pursue, is living fully aligned with your own nature. But of course, for that, you have to know who you really are. Beyond the mask, beyond the expectations, and beyond that false version of yourself that you present to the world every day. You have become so accustomed to pretending that you don't even notice the immense effort you make daily to sustain an image that doesn't represent you. But the mind is relentless. Even if you try to ignore it, there will always be something within you that rebels, something that sooner or later breaks the facade. Want an uncomfortable but liberating truth? As long as you continue hiding behind characters, you will never know true tranquility. The stress, the anxiety, and the constant feeling of emptiness are simply the logical consequence of a life lived for others. But here comes the tricky part, and Montaigne had it clear. Most people prefer the security of an uncomfortable life before the risk of facing the uncertainty of being themselves. They prefer to continue with a half-life, settling for crumbs of happiness rather than facing risk of discovering who they really are. And you, which group are you in? Are you one of those who assume the risk of finding themselves? Or one of those who prefer to remain comfortably numb by routine? Because yes, routine is a very effective anesthetic. It keeps you busy, distracted, trapped in a repetitive circle that slowly numbs your will. But what you don't see is that this apparent security comes at a very high price. The total loss of your inner freedom. And freedom, although many confuse it with doing whatever they want at any moment, is actually something much deeper. Freedom is having the courage to be true to yourself, even if that means challenging expectations, breaking patterns, and sometimes disappointing those you love the most. Perhaps at this point you think, what if by being authentic, I lose everything I've achieved so far? And here's where another paradox appears. If you really need to pretend to maintain what you have, then it was never yours in the first place. True relationships, the projects that really matter, the achievements worth keeping, they survive perfectly well with authenticity. On the contrary, only by being authentic do you discover what really matters and what was simply taking up space. In reality, you have much less to lose than you imagine, and much more to gain than you believe. But of course, you must first take the leap. That leap into the unknown, into a life you do not fully control, but that at least will truly be yours. And here again comes the central idea of Montaigne, reminding us that detachment does not mean abandoning what you love, but understanding that only from absolute freedom can you love and build genuinely. Everything you possess from anxiety and attachment ends up possessing you. Here's the message no one tells you. Most live in fear of losing what they have because they've never allowed themselves to discover what would happen if they lost it. They cling desperately to relationships, jobs, prefabricated identities. And in that effort, they forget that real life begins right when you stop clinging to what doesn't represent you. So, what are you going to do now? Will you continue living by inertia, afraid to discover who you are? Or will you finally have enough courage to let go of the known and launch yourself into the uncertainty that terrifies you, but holds the possibility of discovering something much more valuable? Who you really are, away from control, approval, and fear. This is the path Montaigne walked from his silent tower, and it is the same path that now lies before you. Will you dare to walk it, or will you settle for continuing to be a spectator of your own existence? The answer is yours alone. Following that line, we can explore how the act of storytelling is not only a vehicle for conveying knowledge or emotions, but also a deep mirror of our search for identity. When we narrate, whether consciously or unconsciously, we position ourselves in front of the reflection of what we are or what we long to be. The narrative then becomes a powerful tool for self-exploration, where each character or situation projects our deepest desires or our most hidden fears. We often forget that fiction is also a way of rehearsing life, a kind of emotional simulator in which we can live multiple destinies without taking real risks. Therefore, in times of collective uncertainty or crisis, like the times we live in, stories become even more relevant. They offer refuge and catharsis simultaneously, but beyond comfort, they also allow a boldness that we seldom dare to show in our everyday reality, inviting us to transgress imaginary limits and explore radically different perspectives. And here comes a fascinating point. How much do the stories we tell ourselves influence our daily decisions? Perhaps the narrative we cultivate internally determines how we interpret external reality, filtering our experiences and invisibly but constantly shaping the course of our lives. Thus, the power of storytelling is not only social or cultural, but intimately personal, capable of transforming our present and future from the words we choose to tell ourselves who we are. This leads us to an even more provocative question. What if changing the story we tell ourselves internally was a way to rewrite our destiny? It's not far-fetched to think that many people live trapped in inherited narratives that don't entirely belong to them. Stories of failure, limitations, imposed roles, and yet accept them as unmovable truths. In this sense, reclaiming one's own narrative can be a profoundly revolutionary act, rewriting ourselves not just as victims, but as protagonists with agency, capable of reimagining the past and projecting different futures. Moreover, there is an intriguing phenomenon. The stories we tell not only affect how we act, but also how others perceive us. A well-articulated narrative about who we believe we are can become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, influencing our relationships, our opportunities, and the way the world responds to us, as if the internal narrative were a silent script that we all unknowingly help to perform. Thus, consciously building our personal story is not just a matter of introspection, but also a life strategy. On the other hand, we must consider the role of contradiction within the personal narrative. We are not linear beings, nor should our stories be. Embracing that a rich narrative includes dark zones, changes of course, contradictions, and ambiguities is embracing the human in its entirety. Indeed, the best stories are not those where everything fits perfectly, but those that leave us with open questions, moments of discomfort, and flashes of truth among the confusion. It is in that imperfection where the beauty of the narrated, and therefore of life itself, lies. And perhaps the most poetic of all this is that we never stop rewriting ourselves. Every conversation, every encounter, every silence even, adds a line to the narrative. We are perpetual writers of an unfinished text, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, that every decision, no matter how small, is sculpting a new version of our story. And if you've read this far, you may have already realized something powerful. We are not secondary characters in a story written by others. We are authors in the midst of a creative process. And the fascinating thing is that there are no final drafts. Every day can be a new page. Yes, but also a page that rewrites the previous ones. What yesterday seemed like a sad chapter, today can be read as the turning point before rebirth. And that, perhaps, is the great alchemy of the human narrative. turning scars into symbols, mistakes into plot twists, silences into suspense. But beware, because here comes the final twist. What if the true art of living was not knowing exactly what story we are telling? Because in uncertainty, there is also beauty. In not knowing whether you are in a comedy, a tragedy, or an epic, there is an almost magical freedom. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not those that close with a big applause, but those that leave you wanting to keep writing, because it's not over yet. And now we have come to the end. Although you know that endings are also disguised beginnings. If any of this resonated with you, subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. And leave me this phrase in the comments: I rewrite my story. That way, I'll know you made it here and that you are part of this community of conscious, curious, and brave narrators. See you in the next episode, where you might not have the answers, but you will definitely come out with better questions. Until then, close the book, but don't put it away, because the next paragraph could change everything.